Good evening, everyone. My name's Tim. Welcome to Travelex. I'm going to be talking about building products from scratch using a microservices-first approach. And we'll be looking at the pros and cons of sort of microservices-first versus monolith-first. So, from monolith to microservices, has anyone been to or heard of a talk with a name a bit like this? Good number of people. Okay, I'm not talking about this. But there are some interesting topics in it. So the idea of if you've already got a monolith and you want to migrate to microservices, maybe it's about scaling independent modules independently or reducing the complexity or increasing modularity of your code base. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. The working title for my talk was actually From Microservices to Microservices, because we don't have a monolith. We didn't start with a monolith. We started with a microservices first approach about 4 years ago. So I can talk a bit about our journey. Of course, starting with that, what I should have called it was actually From Nothing to Microservices. So I'll start with a bit of background about Travelex. Travelex is just over 40 years old. We started as really a bricks and mortar retail business selling foreign currency. Has anyone actually used us out of interest? Hopefully some people have heard of us before. Okay, not, okay. So, sorry, you can stay. So we've got the retail business that's still very strong. We sell foreign currency. We've got a whole range of other products though. So we've got ATMs, we've got prepaid currency cards. We've actually got so many products that I still learn about new products that I'd never heard we'd got in sort of countries around the world. About 4 years ago, we started a digital transformation. So that, like I said, that's when I joined. There are a number of products that we were looking to build. The idea was, let's try out a few things, let's see what customers like, let's see if we can innovate and put something new into the market. Fail fast, let's see what works. So I joined as part of the team working on a payments platform. Now our remit was build something generic. It should have reusable components so other parts of the business could use it again. It should be scalable. You know, we're very ambitious about how much we wanted it to scale. It should integrate with other Travelex products in the future at some point. So wouldn't it be great if you could have go to an ATM or go online and top up the balance of your prepaid card, or use a mobile app to do the same, and have it all come through a platform that would also give us a single customer view? Wouldn't that be great? That was the ambition. So we thought about how we were going to approach this, and we came up with a couple of principles. We said, well, we want to go cloud first. Before this, Travelex, typically it was on-prem data centers around the world. We said we want to go cloud first so that we can build things quickly, we can spin up infrastructure quickly, we can scale, and we don't have to worry about that underlying infrastructure, underlying hardware. We're not experts in that. We build products, we write software, we don't manage hardware, so cloud first was the right thing for us. And microservices first, that's why everyone's here after all. Why did we choose microservices first? Well, the things I've mentioned before about the remit, so reusable components, being able to plug and play other Travelex products potentially in the future, and the scalability. So this seemed like the right thing for us. In terms of the tech stack that we've used in our microservices platform, we chose AWS as a cloud provider. In AWS, we used ECS, so 4 years ago when we started, things like Kubernetes, really in its infancy. EKS didn't exist for that reason. Things like Fargate in Amazon, if people have worked with that before, that didn't exist yet. So ECS backed by EC2 was the choice we went with. We were using Docker. In terms of the language for our business logic, we've got quite a range of engineers who'd work with different languages. We sort of came to a consensus on Java, 8 being the latest version at the time. We considered things like Scala, but we thought it's got quite a high learning curve. Java 8's good to hire for, it's got a good community around it. It seemed like a good choice. And then we were using sort of all the standard Java libraries you'd expect. I won't go into Spring Hibernate details. So the product journey, the first thing we launched was Wire. So this is an international, apologies, it's not too easy to see that on this projector. This is an international money transfer product, direct to consumer. So let's say you want to send money abroad, or maybe you're lucky enough to have a house abroad and you need to pay for your mortgage, pay for bills, you can use Wire to send money abroad. Very soon after Wire, we pivoted. We pivoted the product proposition that was sat on top of the platform. we had an opportunity to work with a bank in the US, and we started building a proposition to work with banks. Shortly after that, we readied the platform for a launch in Australia and New Zealand. And right now, what we're working on is more consumer-focused products with a global reach. I'd love to talk more about that, but I'm actually not allowed to. So, and again, I have to apologize. I put this on the projector just before starting this talk and realized how bad this diagram looks. It's for illustrative purposes, so use your imagination. This is the platform. This is what we had when we launched Wire. So Wire, the product, everything in blue is our microservices. And some of these white things, this is sort of third parties that we use, so calls coming out, other services that we use. So this was all right, we built this. And then we had this sudden pivot. And we have banks coming into the system as well. So we built a few new services. We also got a lot of reusability out of the existing services, which, great, box tick, that was part of the remit. We wanted to do that. Excellent. So what hurdles did we face when we were doing this? Well, I sort of made that sound quite easy. We did get a lot of reusability out of the services. There's a couple of new ones. But there were some fundamentally different concepts in the consumer business versus the bank business. So where you've got a direct-to-consumer business, you've got customers, and actually you treat them as users that have usernames and passwords. And you've got banks that connect into your platform, and they have their customers, they've got their support agents, and we've got our customer support agents. You've actually got a very different model for how you manage users and customers. So although the services didn't change much, some of the logic had to be drastically changed, and that was really difficult. And the problem is we didn't know to start with. We didn't know we were going to make this pivot. We didn't know, and we couldn't prepare for it. But hang on a minute, didn't we say part of the remit was to build something that was generic, reusable? So isn't that a bit of a contradiction? Shouldn't we have built for this in the first place? Well, it's really difficult, when you're that ambitious and your ambitions are that broad, to know in advance how your product's going to be used and the direction you want to go in. You can't always anticipate pivots. So it's really difficult. You don't have a full understanding of your domain yet. So how does this approach that we went through, the journey we've come through so far, how does that compare back to that talk about monolith to microservices? How did it compare to that? What I said was we don't know about our full domain knowledge up front. We don't know what the product's going to do. When you've got a monolith, you've already got your products, you've already got the code, and in effect that encapsulates your domain knowledge and your functional requirements. You know what inputs you can give to the system, you know what you get out of it. When you do the migration, it's about changing the non-functional requirements, not what the product's actually doing. And your engineers, your product owners, they've been through the process of building it. So they've got the domain knowledge, they've got the expertise, they've learnt as they've built and made mistakes and iterated. So they know this. So one of the things about the monolith to microservices talk is, I always say you've got to identify boundaries. You've got to work out what are your different domains in this monolith, and then you peel them out into separate microservices. And each one of those is a domain. So how do you define these boundaries from scratch when you're starting with microservices and you don't know what your domain is? When it's really difficult, you've got to have a guess, basically. You've got to have a guess at where your product's going to go, and you build microservices around that. So what about when those boundaries shift? What about when your requirements change? Changing requirements. Everyone's been there. Well, with a monolith, it's maybe not quite as easy as this, but in some cases you can just do a little refactor, move some code around, maybe hit your key combination in your IDE of choice, rename something, and everything just changes. Great, not too difficult. With microservices, you've got APIs between them. You've got HTTP calls. You've got potentially messaging that goes onto queues. And does that mean that if I put something in this microservice and then I realize actually requirements have changed, wouldn't it be much more sensible for it to be over here? Then actually I might have to even change my infrastructure and move the queues around or change the subscriptions. And there's a big overhead to that. It's really, really difficult. But you've got to work with it. So how did we tackle this? Well, 4 years ago when I first joined, we had quite a small team. We had maybe 8 people. And we structured the team around the whole platform. So we said, one big team, across all the platform, which means that we can rationalize what should go where, and if things change, then we move them, and the whole team's got a view across this. And that worked kind of well. Everything was sensible, or we were able to make sense of things. And then the team grew. So in 2016, we probably grew to having like 3 times as many people. Three pizza teams, or 2 pizza teams being a term introduced by Amazon, where you have a team that's only big enough that you can feed it with 2 pizzas, American pizzas. Because if it's any bigger, then you start to lose productivity, and that's what we had. Our team grew too much. Meetings got really long, stand-ups turned to sit-downs. So we split the teams. We had sort of maybe 3 distinct work streams. We split teams around the work streams. And that worked well because each individual team had ownership of that work stream. They could focus on that and they could deliver. But all 3 teams, they were still working across the entire platform. So what did this mean? Mostly merge conflicts, because everyone was touching the same code. The difference was the teams weren't talking to each other in the same way they were when we had one big team. And this is the sort of thing that we face. So who's heard of Conway's law? A few people. Good, excellent. I love this. I think this is so true, and I refer to this a lot when we talk about team structure. The general idea is the way you shape your organization, the way you shape your teams, will be reflected in the software that you write. So if you've got teams that work across, have cross-domain interests and work across your entire platform, then you're probably going to have quite confused microservices that actually function more as a distributed monolith. Sort of gets away from what we're aiming for, right? So how could we have built the services better? How could we have maybe improved this? Well, how do you cope with shifting boundaries? Maybe it would have been easier if we had better release pipelines. We were able to release things faster, or we were able to add new services really, really quickly so that you didn't add too much logic into one service. Or maybe being able to spin up an environment with, at the touch of a button, let you test things more. But these are all just ways to let you do the same thing faster. You've still got that overhead of having to take something out of one service and put it in another. And bear in mind, when we had this pivot, when boundaries really did change quite a lot because the product changed, we'd already got a live product. So you start making changes to your API and shifting things around, you've got to think about backwards compatibility, and you've got to think about downtime. Has anyone read The Mythical Man Month? A couple of people. I haven't read it actually, but I've heard some great quotes from it. Here's one of them. So, in most projects, the first system built is barely usable. Hence, plan to throw one away. You will anyhow. So with Wire, we'd built that. Now it was good. We got some reusability out of it. And in terms of teams, we actually did adjust the teams, thinking back to Conway's law, to fit this more sensibly. We were launching Wire, and we said, well, okay, product teams, product-focused cross-functional teams. We had front-end, back-end. We had one focused, rallied around Wire. We had one rallied around the proposition with banks that was sort of coming up in the future. Conway's law struck. Actually, what happened was our code base, or our services, diverged a little bit into very product-focused things. We want to split those domains in 2. And whilst we got a lot of reuse out of the services we built for Wire, a lot of those services were working independently of the services. So maybe not this great use of domains that we've talked about. So we'll come back to this nasty diagram that people can hopefully just about see. So we had Wire. We introduced this integration with banks, a few new services. What are we doing now? How are we consolidating this? How are we rationalizing that effect of Conway's law, which is having product-focused teams that sort of parted our platform a little bit? So basically what we've done, now that we have the full domain knowledge, now that we know where our product is going, we haven't got this broad ambition anymore. We've decided this is the direction we take the platform in. We know what the product needs to be able to do. We have the domain knowledge. So we've started building V2 of our API. So new API, consolidating these ideas, rationalizing these concepts. A few new services again, lots of reusability still, which is nice. And this consolidates those ideas. Now, Wire is something, it's a website that we manage in-house, so migrating that across shouldn't be too difficult. We've got this new thing that powers Wire. Getting banks may be a little more difficult, but all of our new consumer propositions, they can come onto something that's built knowing what we know now, with the power of hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, which maybe with the monolith, where you've already built the system you have, when you're starting building things from scratch, you don't have that luxury. So yeah, maybe one day we get everything running on that. That would be lovely. Let's say hypothetically, we'd actually started with a monolith. We built this wire monolith, we built it quickly with the idea that, well, we know we want microservices, but it's going to be a real headache to start with when we don't have that full knowledge of our domain. We'll build that. What happens when we pivot? Well, we say, with the pivot, we now know everything that our product needs to do. Now we've got this understanding. Now we know the direction we need to go in. Now we can build it the right way, non-functionally too. So we can have this microservices architecture that we wanted all along for all the right reasons. We've still got this monolith over here. But what did we just say? Well, we said, wire something that we have in-house, migrate it across. Now this isn't far off where we're at now, or where we can be in the near future. But you know what? It would have been a hell of a lot easier to get there. It would not have been as painful. I wouldn't have had to sit through those merge conflicts. Probably would have been a lot happier. So, should you build microservices if you're thinking? First of all, if you've got a simple problem, if you only want to do it because you think it's shiny, simple system, don't do it. It'll be a waste of time and it'll make your life really difficult. So you need to have a complex system, something which you intend to scale, something which is going to expand. If you've got a known domain, if you know what your product's going to be, or if you're in the scenario where you've got your monolith already, therefore it's a known domain, yes, use microservices, they're brilliant, I really like them. At that scale. If you don't know the domain, yes, build microservices, but not from scratch. That's what I would do with hindsight. If I could go back, I would have actually gone monolith first. And I would have planned to do it. So the idea of throwaway architecture, there's nothing wrong with it. If you know that you're going to build something for the sake of learning, focus on working out what the functional requirements are, then worry about how it scales. It's actually a lot quicker and a lot simpler. So don't get ahead of yourself. Don't try to optimize prematurely. A lot of people say don't worry about failing, fail fast, these sorts of ideas. I say plan to learn. If you build something and then you throw it away, don't see it as a failure. Think about what you're going to learn from it. Think about why you're doing it and what you're going to achieve from it. And there's much more than just having a big code base at the end of it. It's the learning that you've got and the knowledge that you have about the domain, the expertise that you've picked up along the way. And lastly, I think actually people are more important than tech. So if you've got that one team and that team's not going to be growing anytime soon, you can have this fantastic microservices architecture, but are you going to have those different domain boundaries? Are you going to have all the benefits of that? Thank you.